Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. Earlier in the week, Governor Matt Bevin, along with House Speaker Jeff Hoover and Senate President Robert Stivers, announced their proposal to fix the state pension system. Later, we'll hear some of what was said about the planned overhaul, and we'll have some reaction. That's in a few minutes. But first, Kentucky's Education Commissioner is here. As is often the case in the Commonwealth, we have some things to be very proud of and many things to work on in education. Our graduation rates are improved. Recent assessment tests show improvements in some key areas. But a persistent achievement gap shows up again. Kentucky is moving toward its first charter schools that are likely to open up next fall. Regulations have just been approved for how they'll be organized and operated. How might charter schools affect the existing public schools? We're also just coming off Safe Schools Week in Kentucky, which is designated to address bullying and dealing with conflicts on campuses. Education Commissioner Dr. Stephen Pruitt joining us on Kentucky Newsmakers. We appreciate you coming in.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Enjoy it.
Commissioner, you have some recent good news on some of those test scores that came out, the assessment showing that there is a lot of achievement, but there is room for improvement, right?
Absolutely. There's a lot of hard work going on out in our schools right now, but we have to really make sure that we point out the elephant in the room, and that is that we still have a tremendous achievement gap. And while we should always pause and appreciate and celebrate the good things, we have to realize the tremendous lift that we have going forward with making sure that each child in our Commonwealth has an opportunity for a great education.
What causes the achievement gap? When you look at it, do you see socioeconomic trends? You
do, but the thing that's a problem is sometimes we put too much on that. What I mean by that is, the average child by the age of 3 has, in a low-income family, has heard about 30 million words less than their more fluent counterparts. So they're coming into school already at a deficit, but that doesn't mean that they're less capable of learning. To me, you've got kids that are already coming in at a deficit. We've got to work harder in K-3, especially around literacy. And one of the things I think you're going to see going forward is we're going to have a greater emphasis on early literacy so that we can get those kids really better prepared so they can transition from learning to read to reading to learn. But then I think we've got to work harder in our whole system across the board to provide a better equity of what students are actually getting. We're finding that we did a study last year, and we found that African American students were actually having to score a full letter grade higher than their white counterparts to have the same probability of meeting math benchmarks on the ACT. And to me, what that means is either we're having lower expectations for those students, or we're giving them different content. So one of the things that we've been working on this year that will be starting in the next fall is we've redone all of our course codes so that there's only going to be one Algebra 1 class. We have assigned standards to that. Historically, what's happened is districts are able to choose what content goes in which course. And I think it leads to some inequities, not because anybody's necessarily trying to be nefarious, but because sometimes they think they're helping. And what all the studies show us is actually kids will rise to the expectation you expect them to. And I'm going to expect that our schools give the same opportunities to all kids.
When you put the team on the field to try to close that achievement gap, it has to include the student, right? Mm-hmm. The parents, the schools, who else?
It's really a community issue as much as it is a school issue. We want to lay a lot at the feet of the schools, and justifiably so. But there's also a big community aspect to that, and what we see in areas where we see this tremendous growth, and we see a decrease of achievement gap, is where there's a community that's come together to do some pretty great things. Here in Lexington, for instance, there's the BMW program, the Black Males Working Program, who's working really hard with the black males in the area to give them a whole different perspective of how community can support achievement, and then they work closely with the schools. We see the same thing in my original home state of Georgia, where there was actually a charter school that was built with the whole purpose of actually changing a community, not just because it was a charter, but because the community wanted to change. And so if we're really going to close the achievement gap, we've got to do things better in K-12. We've got to ensure that there's going to be better equity. But there's an aspect here too where we've got to include our parents, our communities, our churches, all of those folks coming together to really support our kids in a different way.
When you see unique challenges like the opioid crisis, just a horrific problem here in Kentucky, many students are in state custody or they are with other relatives, and is that a kind of barrier for them as well?
Oh, it's a tremendous barrier. I mean, we are dealing with everything from the opioid epidemic to students who are living in families who have multi-generational unemployment. We're dealing with kids living in areas of the state where there's no industry, and so the tax base is tough. All those things are barriers. They're not insurmountable barriers. They can feel that way, but I think that's where, and people say this, they throw this it's almost become cliche, but I do believe it's true. It's where we do have to start thinking about how we do school differently so that we actually meet some of these kids where they are.
4 schools recently won Blue Ribbon school status for overall academic achievement. Eazell Elementary in Morgan County, Graves Central Elementary, Norton Elementary in Louisville, and Rich Pond Elementary, that's in Warren County. What is going on in those high-performing schools that maybe others can learn from?
Yeah, from what I can tell, they continue to have high achievement, and in large part, it's because they're trying to meet the needs of the kids where they are. A lot more of individualized instruction. One of the things that I hope I can see us do as a state is move to a place where we worry less about exactly what course a kid takes to learn a certain content and recognize the kid learned the content. And so I think in our Blue Ribbon schools, what we're seeing is a different approach to how they're doing this. But even in those Blue Ribbon schools, we've still got a lot of work to do.
Are there some cases where it is the kind of school system where they, or school where they just don't tell the child that lack of success is an option?
That's
high expectations.
High expectations. I mean, every research study you can ever find, that's the case. If kids will go where you expect them to go. But they have to be supported. You can't just say, we expect you to do that. If you do that, then you go back to the old model in post-secondary of look to your right, look to your left. One of them's not going to be here at the end of the semester. So that's not the kind of high expectation we're talking about. We're talking about the expectation that says, you are very capable of doing this, but I'm going to help you, and I'm going to make sure that we give you the supports to get there. Charter
schools are coming. Regulations for those have just been adopted. I know you have spent some of your career in that area. Do you believe that we'll see a proliferation of charter schools in Kentucky?
Maybe in several years, but I think with most things, it takes a little time to build that up. When we think about charter schools, the process for the regulations was pretty tough. We didn't wait for the actual start date for that bill. We started developing regulations before. Being the 44th state gives us a great opportunity to make sure that we do the things that have been done well in the other states, and that's what we really tried to do, is model those regulations in that way. But now we're in a place where we're in October, we're looking at next fall, hopefully seeing our first set of charter schools. But I think that probably people are going to wait a little bit. They're going to wait and see how things go, possibly in the session, see how budget happens. But I think that we're going to see some really quality charter schools start in the fall, but I don't expect that we're going to see a huge proliferation right off the bat.
Well, do you anticipate that there will be K through 12 charter schools, or there will be some that will just do, just be high schools or just elementaries?
I think there will. I think that that's one of the really good things about a charter school is it allows you to be pretty targeted. In my own experience with what we did in Georgia, we saw everything from K3 to K8 to K12 to 9-12. It really just depended on what the needs of that community really needed at the time.
Commissioner, do nearby public schools have reason for concern that students could be cherry-picked away by charters?
I don't believe so. We have worked really hard in these regs, and the law is pretty specific that cherry-picking is not going to be an option. At the end of the day, they're still our kids. These are going to be public charter schools. They're still schools that, while they have a different governance structure, they're still the kids that belong to our public school system. And so, I get it. I lived through it in Georgia when we introduced charters there as well. Admittedly, it wasn't quite as controversial a thing in Georgia as it has been here. But I think that once we really get into this, I think people will see that this is just another opportunity for our kids.
How will athletics be handled for charter schools?
You know, the way athletics works is the way the bill states it is if you offer any sport in a charter school, then basically the kid has to go deal with that sport in the charter school. I think it's going to be very open at first. I think that, in fact, I would anticipate that we may not even see very many athletic programs and charters right off the bat, because you want to be able to fully staff your team, so to speak. But you know, I think that's just going to be a school-to-school kind of discussion about whether that really helps or not.
Will they have the right to go then play for the nearby public school?
If the charter school doesn't offer any athletics, then they will be able to go back to their school of assignment.
So you say next fall we'll have some?
Mm-hmm, I believe so.
All right. We are with the Kentucky Education Commissioner, Dr. Stephen Pruitt. We have some more questions for him on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers, and later we'll be hearing from Governor Matt Bevin and others about this plan to try to fix the pension system. Welcome back now to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. We're continuing our discussion today with Kentucky's Education Commissioner, Dr. Stephen Pruitt, and we appreciate him coming in. Governor Bevin and some others are trying to put some more emphasis on workforce readiness and urging students not to spin their wheels once they get to college and chew up money and try to make a decision as to what they want to do or what they want to be once they're off to college or a technical school. What are elementary and high schools doing to help them think about a career path?
Sure. So Governor Bevin's dead on with that. We've got to do a better job of getting kids to even know what's out there. So in our new accountability system, we're trying to really expand the full realm of career exploration. So for instance, schools are going to be required to do career exploration in middle school going forward. What are even out there? In our budget request going forward this year for this coming up session, we're going to hope that we can put folks in our different area technical centers that can actually start making connections between our schools and industry and start really enhancing apprenticeship opportunities, enhancing a better flow from school to work. And we're really going to be pushing the fact that we've done the work to find out what the top 5 industry sectors are in each region of the state. And schools are going to be rewarded for being able to have career and technical education pathways for those 5 in their region, so that we can try to move the workforce faster from school into the workforce. And not just because it's workforce, but because we've got an opportunity here, I believe, at this point, to start to blur the lines between CTE and academics, so that we can actually let kids see that there's so much of a broader range of what they even have available to them.
So once you determine their interest, there is also a bill being pre-filed to require soft skills that they know to you know, show up on time, that they have some basic manners, maybe customer service skills and that sort of thing. Are you supportive of that?
Absolutely. I think that we've got to be careful about it. I think we've got to make sure that we make good decisions to allow us to make it where we can implement it with fidelity. We are actually going to be undergoing a new graduation requirement discussion this year. Going back to even the achievement gap conversation earlier, it's time that Kentucky really takes a good look at what we're requiring students in a 21st century environment. Are we really allowing students to go into the workforce? Do we allow the flexibility that students have available to get them into that workforce? That is a big conversation, but part of that's got to be rooted in essential skills.
What do you have in the back of your mind that might be in this graduation requirement that people might not have thought of?
You know, I think probably one of the biggest things is I want us to get to a place that we really start making education individualized enough that we worry about what kids are learning and not what kids are taking. Now, that may sound a little bit odd, but a student that I met in Henderson County is a great example. I walked into their welding shop, and he was at the plasma cutter, and he had designed my name into this plasma cutter. So we started talking, and I said, explain what you did here. And he said, well, I had to code this in, and to do it I had to calculate the angles for your name, the slopes of the line, the distance for the lines. So he's talking about some pretty incredible math. I don't know that he realized he was probably doing trigonometry at times. but he loved what he was doing. And so where I hope that we can take our new graduation requirement is that we actually start being more individualized, letting students really follow a passion, because that's what schools really should do, is give the opportunity for kids to follow that passion. But also, I think it's time that we start really evaluating what our kids learning in school. Right now, we just have end-of-course tests. And frankly, they've not been very good. And I think it's open to question about whether or not we can guarantee each kid has gotten what they need. So I hope we have a more robust assessment program too.
We mentioned it was National Safe Schools Week last week. Too often we hear of troubles on our campuses around the nation. Do you want Kentucky schools to be a place where at least the parents know their children are safe?
You know, there's a thing in education research called Maslow's hierarchy of need. And one of the things we know is you can't learn if there are certain other needs not being met. One of those is safety. We are going to be convening a social and emotional learning task force this year, with the whole point that we start really taking a bigger look at how we're conducting education in Kentucky, beyond just the academics and the achievement. But how are we making sure our kids are safe, and how do we make sure they feel safe? And what are the policies and different aspects that we need to do as policymakers to ensure that?
Down to less than a minute, we're going to hear shortly from the governor and some key lawmakers on a proposed fix for the pension system problem. We're hearing some pushback from some teachers, and some have already hit the retirement door. Do you have concerns?
Well, it's a massive problem. I mean, the governor and Speaker Hoover and President Stivers hit the nail on the head when they said this is a massive issue, and continue to kick the can down the road is a problem. So I respect them. I applaud them for taking the bull by the horns. I think, you know, the devil's always in the details. I think we always have to wait and see what the bill says. But I applaud them for the hard work they've done, and I look forward to reading the bill.
All right, Commissioner, thank you for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And coming up next, you'll hear some extended clips from Governor Matt Bevin and other Republican leaders on state pensions, another piece of reaction as well. It's next on Kentucky Newsmakers. And welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. The long-awaited proposal to deal with Kentucky's deep pension shortfalls was released this week by Governor Matt Bevin and other leading Republicans. It means current state workers will get most of what they expect, and future hires will be under a different 401k type system if it all passes. Governor Bevin laid it out for reporters along with House Speaker Jeff Hoover and Senate President Robert Stivers, and we hear a little from them and then some reaction.
We've got a bill that will save this pension system over the next 30+ years. And then how we're going to fund that is what happens in every 2 years in the budget process. And that's the work of the legislature. I happen to be an expert in this area. Most people are not. These guys are both lawyers. You don't want me being your lawyer, you know, but you wouldn't necessarily want them being the person that was managing a pension system. I mean, the point is each of us has different experiences we brought to this equation. So for me, the fact that this was the crisis that it was has been clear to me since long before I got into government. It's why I ran to be the governor, because I realized this system was about to fail. And despite great efforts coming out of the Senate for years, which I applauded and appreciated, and we've seen bills like Senate Bill 2 from 4 years ago trying to at least start to move us in the right direction. You know, we've seen efforts made, but it was not enough. My frustration, what led me to run for governor, was the fact that it wasn't being addressed. That frustration was actually relieved by working with these guys and their leadership teams. Because while they weren't experts in this, and very few people in Kentucky are, they've stepped up, and as Jeff said, I mean, we've learned a lot in 3 months. Every one of us has. And this is a complicated process. But we've got a good bill. And it will take time. Sure, everyone wishes we could get it taken care of in 3 or 5 or 10 years. But the cost of doing that would be to gut everything in government and to violate, at least potentially, certain promises that were made. We're not going to do that. We're going to meet every promise that was made to everybody. We're going to remove all of that concern. We're not going to change anything for any retiree. We're not going to change people's retirement dates. We're going to allow anybody in the system to continue forward. We're going to honor the people who are hazard duty folks by recognizing that that is a different job than most of the rest of us have in government. And we are going to protect everybody at every turn. And that takes time. And so the net result of this is 30-some-odd years, and that's okay, because it's the right thing to do.
Not being critical of anyone in the past, but I think everyone in this room knows that this problem has been looming for several years, and no one has had the resolve to step up and move forward like Matt Bevin has, and I appreciate his leadership. We've had several meetings over the past several months. I think both of these gentlemen would say we didn't know if we'd get to this point today or not as a result of some of those meetings, but a lot of work, a lot of time, maybe 12 to 15 meetings. The shortest meeting I can recall was 4.5 hours, some of them lasting 7 and 8 hours. But we came into this with the governor, with President Stivers and the Senate, with 3 goals that I think we all shared. Number one, as the governor said, was to meet our legal obligations, to keep the promises that we made to our teachers, our state workers, and our retirees. Secondly, to have a solution that provided a long-term foundation financially, a strong foundation in a long-term sense for a financially solvent and sustainable system. And I think as you get into this, you will see that we have done that. And the third thing was to avoid bankruptcy, because when you look at where we are and where we've been and the trajectory that we're headed on, something had to be done to keep that from happening in Kentucky. How did we get here? Frankly, years of kicking the can down the road, not casting aspersions on anyone, but as I said in my opening remarks, there's just been a lack of resolve to really address this issue at every branch of government. I commend the Kentucky State Senate, who probably 8 or 9 years ago began beating the drum and sounding the alarm about the problems with our pension system. And they have repeatedly done that year after year after year. Former President Williams and President Stivers has continued that. I commend them, but now we are in a situation where the House also recognized the problem. And one of the things that we said when we got elected in November as the new majority was, we are no longer going to step back and refuse to tackle tough issues. And make no mistake, I know a little bit more about pensions than I did 3 months ago, but I also recognize just how complex and complicated the entire issue is. This is the most difficult, the most complex, complicated issue that I know that President Stivers and myself, and we've both been here 21 years, have ever dealt with. But I'm really proud of where we are and the direction that we've headed.
In this last budget cycle, record amounts of contributions were made to the pension plan because of the direction and the leadership of Governor Bevin. I don't say this without the ability to back it up. You can go back and look at every budget in the last 20 years and compare it to the budget that we're currently operating under, and it proves my statement. To that end, we took off through the period of time that Governor started his term. He requested that we sit back and do an assessment and that we fund the ability to have individuals look at all the systems. And as the Speaker said, it is complex because you have multiple systems, subcategories in each system, and then subcategories to the subcategories when you're trying to do this, and then individuals who go between respective subcategories to the subcategories and then in between the respective systems. And to that extent, it took a long time. It took a lot of in-depth reading and work to understand what we needed to do to, as the governor says, and as you see on the screen, keep the promise. I stand here with the Speaker and say it is the most complex problem and the most intricate problem I've ever dealt with in 21 years.
Who's going to want to go into education? Nobody. Say it loud. Who's going to want to go into education? Say it. Nobody. Find revenue. Do what you have to do for the crisis, but don't ruin public education in Kentucky. Since 2002, when I retired, I could not sleep. So I read, and I read all the articles about educators in all the country and how horrible they were and about how the government was, in each state, was taking their pensions away from them, and they were closing their schools because guess what came into their state? C-H-A-R-T-E-R. Spell it. Exactly. Charter schools. And then let's talk about the number of charter schools that have been chained up the next day when the kids went to school. The corporation ran out of money. Do you think corporations are not going to run the education system in this state? Let me ask you people this question. Who's going to manage this deferred whatever it's called? Huh? Who's going to manage this? Do you think there's going to be a Kentucky retired teachers allowed to exist? Ask yourself that, because they are out to ruin KEA right this minute.
Well, that was from a rally that was held in Harrison County on the same day as the announcement by the governor and the other Republicans. It's going to be interesting in the weeks ahead as this is all debated, and a special session likely by the end of the year. That's this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers. We want to thank you for joining us, and we'll see you bright and early this week on WKYT This Morning. We start at 4:30 a.m., and you make it a good week ahead.